Our group had made the journey down the great river to Daman on a smaller longboat used for fishing in the outer waters of the sea. Our party was large enough that such a vessel was necessary to carry our horses and supplies to the dark inner reaches of the forest where our people so rarely traveled. Although the highland elves of the western mountains are a forest-dwelling people, these woods have long been bane to them. It was known that in the old times when the great human tyrants of the east invaded, that these woods had been a battleground for the elven defense. Here, the great human general Calvadath had met his death in the remnants of his army. Here, the elves of the highland cities had used a dark, forbidden magic to entrap and destroy the army of men. The use of such power carries a horrid price, and so the woods were poisoned with energies from the other worlds. The leader of our group was the spell user, Corman of the Great Library. He stood tall and discerning at the bow of the boat, examining the compass while making notes in a large tome. At his side, her long, light brown hair rolling in torrents over her shoulders, was the healer, Shalea. Both were slight wisps, with the almost absent depth of feature and enormous frightening eyes of all elves. She looked upon the dark, overcast sky with obvious nervous apprehension. The storm would not relent, and the night would be even darker and more violent than the previous. It was the end of summer, and the remaining warm months had brought endless storms. Here in the depths of the cursed lands, passing the crumbling towers of the abandoned fortresses we all knew, our journey would grow only more difficult. After docking the boat, we carried our supplies into the forest to camp in what was written of in the old books as a lost village. No shelters would be left after the centuries, but nearby hills provided shelter from the storm's fury. That night, our fire was built and our tents erected. Now that we were here at our destination, the rituals of purification would begin. The forest would be cleansed and the great mines reopened. Their treasure had been lost to our people, and now would be reclaimed. Corman had found the text and convinced the council that such a thing could take place. He had personally chose the group of warriors, and of course me, the most unlikely candidate to attend. The rituals required the presence of a nature priest, but one unlike those of the common churches. A user of the dark energies was necessary for the ritual's proper execution. A witch. So it was done, and I, a criminal and exile to my people, was called to join their sterling group of nobles and soldiers. My grimoire, my dagger, and sword were all kept by Maxus, the great archer and swordsman. So here I stood in the midst of this cursed land, completely defenseless, before the protection of my kindred, who all hated and feared me. It was not for they to understand how one such as I falls into the forgotten arts. Our people are to be pure and beholden to the great light energy. They are creatures of light and joy, the children of the sun. And here was I, who from the day of my birth was given the great burden of dark knowledge and other sight. It was I who could see the spirits of this forest gathered around us in assembly, and it was I who could hear their whispers and feel their intense, dreadful hatred at our presence. Venison roasted on a spit over the fire while my brethren poured the evening wine. Shalea approached and offered a wooden goblet. I accepted and thanked her, but she made no expression of warmth. She offered this only out of pity, as a healer can be prone to do. I looked over at Corman, who sat upon a warm fur across from me, still studying the text he constantly referred to. I approached him. "I fear this will not work," I said, sipping the wine and awaiting his reaction. "Your fears do not concern me, witch," he said, raising his stare from the text. "I am only concerned that you shall fulfill your obligations." "Oh, I shall, but amnesty will mean little to me if our souls remain trapped in the dark spheres with these tortured revenants." "What revenants do you speak of?" "Sir, in all due respect, we are surrounded by vengeful spirits. Their number is so great that they appear to me as a fog of shapes and forms weaving between the trees of the forest. Their individual number is apparent to me only by the dim glow of their eyes. They are trapped here, sir, and they intend for us to join them." "Truly, I find such a thing difficult to believe. If you intend to frighten me, it shall be of no avail." This he said as he looked upon his eyes stern and piercing. "Why don't you tell me of this ritual? I do fear these woods and the outcome of our actions here." You need only to know that your presence is required and that you must be wholly loyal to our cause. So be it, sir. But know that those texts are but footnotes of a knowledge and art mastered by great witches, Corman. To use that power, one must understand that these spirits are no longer reasonable. These long years have left them mad, and once they manifest, which they certainly will, they will be beyond controlling. I am aware of these things, and I would appreciate your silence for the rest of this evening. With that, the sage looked back to his tome. The next day was spent in preparation, and no time was to be wasted before the performing of the great ritual. The entire group walked far into the forest, an early morning dew dripping down onto our cloaks as we found the great grove written of in the text. It was here that the old elven witches had assembled and called upon nature's dark forces to destroy the 900 human soldiers who had invaded the boundaries of the woods. It was here that they had summoned the dreaded persona from the depth of the inner spheres. They had called upon a great vampiric demon spoken of only in the darkest tales told by the ancient storytellers. Called Valdrimwal, or the Stealer of Light in common speech, a thing born from some ancient personality condemned by sick twisted deeds to roam the prisons of the dark spheres. This entity had mercilessly fed upon the army of men and left their bodies empty husks decaying upon the forest floor. But by the rules set in the ritual, all elves were forced to leave, so that eventually the demon would run out of souls on which to feed and once again slumber. However, it did not. Although bound to a certain range by protective enchantments set at the forest border, the demon had plotted for ages before its release. Instead of immediately slacking its thirst on all of the army, it had captured many and taken them deep into the mines, where it had made a lair. Here it rationed them and sustained them far beyond their normal lifespans. Then, with new power, inhabited their forms and fed through them. Their empty, soulless bodies had walked the forest for centuries, feeding on all unfortunate enough to cross the border. But the elves had taken action. They had patrolled the borders for the past 50 years, keeping all sentient, conscious beings from entering. And now it was believed that all of the demon servants were finally gone. Now it was weakened, and now it could be cast out. Or so it was believed by Corman. It was here at the base of the cliff that they found the entrance to the great mines. Their entrances were in the true elven style, great archways of stone carved with runes and glyphs. It was in the depths of these mines that the demon slept, and indeed I felt that he was actually slumbering now. He slept as a giant beast with one eye open, awaiting their approach. The beginning of the ritual would be simple enough. Corman was to read from the text a series of spells designed to imprison the demon within the mine. Then Shalea was to bless the portal and begin a great prayer of healing to purify the forest. It was for me the unfortunate task of actually casting the demon back to his sphere in the other worlds. It was left for me to travel back into the mine alone and to speak the words of the final spell. Corman read his spells with admirable zeal, waving his hands about and shouting the words with great passion. We all watched as the earth trembled and rain began to fall over our group. The gate of the great mine glowed green as the warm light of pure magic infused the stone. And after a few moments I could sense that the gate was indeed barred to all evil forces. Shalaya began her prayers and was joined by the warriors of the group who sang in low voices the hymns of our old gods. It was in time for me to enter. As I stepped up, Corman handed me the small scroll which contained the chant necessary to exorcise. Go now and remember that if you do not speak these words with conviction, then the demon will devour you, he said coldly. I say this only once more, Corman. This thing cannot be easily cast out. His eyes now filled with rage as he grasped my arm. Do not speak such things, coward. You must have faith that the spell will work. If you falter, we could all suffer a fate far worse than any you might imagine. I am aware of this, Sir Sage, but I fear you are the only one ignorant of the possible outcome. With this, I took the scroll and entered the darkness of the mine. Darkness. Such black, endless darkness I have never seen. I carried a torch that burned bright, but the darkness stifled its warmth. I could see as well as if my eyes closed. I had seen the old maps of the chambers and the tunnels, but they were of no aid to me wandering in this utter blackness. I could smell the noxious stench of the lair and feel the presence waiting me. I felt that this demon no longer slept. The spells that Corman had spoken had awakened the beast from his slumber, and he was waiting for me down there, and I felt the victim of an obscene comedy. In time I saw that there was, in fact, radiance ahead. This was truly the mark of the demon's presence. This thing had but a partial physical form. Its body would only be a mere vehicle for the great force that was the monster's essence. This form would be a reflection of the demon's nightmarish mind and thoughts. It was said that the material aspect of a demon could drive one mad with a glimpse, but the form it had made for itself was beyond my comprehension. It lay upon an altar or throne of a sort. Its flesh resembled dead matter rotting and crawling with filth and decay. It was shaped much like a great eel from the rivers, but for an elongated human head. Its mouth was wide and distorted, filled with long yellow fangs. Its body was lined with small breathing holes that expelled an ooze that trickled over the altar. It looked much like a thing of the sea that had been laid out to rot upon the rocks of the beach, and as I approached it, it opened its eyes and looked directly upon me. "You have come to send me back," it said in a gurgling deep voice as it raised up slightly as if to get a better view. I could not yet bring myself to speak, so horrified was I by its appearance. "So you are a witch, I suppose. A little elf witch comes to cast me out of this plane. How very amusing. I am truly indebted to you for this humor, elf friend. I have not laughed in centuries." And indeed, I could hear a deep, rolling reptilian laughter coming from the depths of the creature's form. "I find the irony the most humorous thing, elf witch, for it was witches like you that drew me up from the depths of hell to conquer this realm. And now they send another to take the kingdom of which they presented me. How very rude, don't you think? Your kind give and take so easily. I think that perhaps you do not understand quite how I view this entire situation, my friend. I was asked to come here and help your elders, and here they are trying to steal back my hard-earned payment. I do not think I will take this injustice, little elf witch." I knew well enough not to engage in banter with this creature, for it was well within the range of its abilities to twist and control my thoughts and actions. Taking the scroll, I opened it and began to read out loud the words before me. I recognized the language as that of the sacred runes used by the enclaves of witches since the dawn of magic. The demon laughed in a low monotone, and it was then that I realized I was not alone in the chamber with the beast. They appeared, shambling from the shadowed corners of the lair. They lumbered and dragged themselves toward me, their stench unbearable and the horrible bluish glow of their eyes horrifying. They were human, some ancient, some freshly dead. The demon's servants had not perished. "Come now, little witch, put down that scrap of paper and listen. You have no power here. None of you do. When those fools opened the portal, they had not thought that those energies might continue to flood this world. I am sustained by the power of the dark sphere, witch. The gate is still open. That world and this one are adjoined, and have been since I came. You may have contained me within the forest, but you cannot send me back, for I have brought my prison here. Now you and your arrogant party have joined me." In terror I continued to read, but still the undead servants closed in, and as I finished the last word they were upon me. Something was happening, though. I could feel the power of a great magic surrounding me. The air had taken on a different feel, and now I knew what was occurring. I had no choice now. I fled, and behind me I heard the ancient creature laughing loudly. The earth was shaking in the darkness as I left the mine, and I saw that all had not gone as planned. All the dead of the forest were rising. They crawled up from the dirt and leaves, their clawed, decay hands reaching for open sky. The sky was black and flashed with cold lightning as the wind bent the trees beneath its awesome might. I crossed the path and came to where the camp had been, and here I halted and screamed as I saw the group with which I had arrived fighting a losing battle with the dead of the Forsaken Woods. There were more than I could count. All those souls I had seen the night before, instead of being released, had suffered a brutal transference back into their lost earthly forms. All the ghosts of every person who had died in the forest over the passing of the centuries had been forced back into its own remains, giving them the awful form which they needed to exact their vengeance. Thousands approached the forest as the dark, morbid rain fell upon the stench of rot and death. The elven warriors fought in terror as the dead ripped their flesh with bare bones and claws. Corbin screamed as he was tore apart by their sharp, wicked hands and broken, jagged teeth. Shaliah prayed and screamed for salvation, but the dead ones fell upon her, and she was devoured. I ran from the camp and towards where I knew the boat to be. I fell and rolled down the hill through the soaked underbrush. I crashed upon the rocks of the shore. I pulled myself up and looked upon the boat. I dashed to it and with trembling hands untied the rope which held it to the shore. I boarded and in a mad panic raised the sail. The great winds caught it and it lurched out into the water. I had no hope of navigating the vessel alone, but I held to the prayer that the wind would drive it far enough out into the river that I might escape. I watched as the distance increased between the boat and the shore. I could still hear screams from the woods as I drifted out. I could see the night which had overtaken the scene, that a faint glow of light had surrounded the land like a dome. It was then that I knew. The spells left by those ancient witches were indeed meant to send the demon back, but the demon had lied. It had been given that land as its own, and there was no reclaiming it. It had brought its terrible prison, its sphere of energy, its hell with it to our world. Once those worlds were joined, there is no separating them again. To send the demon back was to send back the kingdom it had claimed. So it is now written that the great cursed forest of Valdrimwal was lost. In the years to pass, it would be only known as a great open expanse of water, as the river flooded the emptiness left behind. It would be called the Kaltagrim, or, in common speech, the Demon's Lake.